If at the end of the day, it turns out that Vice President Biden is going to have more delegates than you do heading into the convention, will you drop out?
Of course, going to drop out. He will win. I mean, we'll run through, I suspect we will run through the process. I think people have a right to vote. But if Biden walks into the convention or at the end of the process has more votes than me, he's the winner.
And that's true whether or not he has a majority or just a plurality.
Absolutely.
Bernie Sanders' conversation with Rachel Maddow comes as he and Joe Biden are separated by about 100 delegates. Tomorrow's primary races could further widen the gap between the two men or allow the Vermont senator to gain back his delegate advantage.
Joining us now via Skype to dive into all things Democratic convention is Nomiki Konst. She's the host of the Nomiki Konst Show. Nomiki also was a part of the Unity Commission that formed to redefine the DNC's rules after the 2016 election. Welcome, Nomiki.
Good to see you, Nomiki.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Of course. So let's dig in. I mean, we've always loved talking to you about the debate. I suspect it's a little bit of a different conversation, or the convention, a little bit different conversation from last time around. But Sanders did indicate there that he wouldn't necessarily force a fight if Biden walked into the convention with the plurality of delegates. But are there some other ways, Nomiki, right now that we're overlooking, of which there are going to be other fights at the convention, as you had mentioned in the past about the rules and many of these other things? And again, this is not necessarily I would say it's a more likely scenario than the last time we talked, but it certainly still could go the other way.
Yeah, I mean, listen, if let's just take a scenario where, say, Bernie Sanders is not in the majority, which I believe he will be in the end, and I think that this campaign is a hard fight against the establishment, and they're clinging and doing everything they can to prevent him from taking the nomination. But let's just say, worst case scenario, Joe Biden has a plurality or the majority of votes going into the convention. And Bernie Sanders says, you know what, for the sake of the party, for the sake of unity, for the sake of being able to defeat Donald Trump and have a unified message for the next, 4 or 5 months, I am suspending my campaign. Well, by suspending his campaign, he doesn't necessarily suspend his delegates. And I think this is where the number of delegates he brings in, if he gets, say, 45% of the delegates or 43 like last time or something like that, those delegates can go and sit on these committees, like the Rules Committee and the Platform Committee, like they did last time around, and negotiate for, specifically around the platform, a stronger, more progressive platform. Now, we did that in 2016. I was on the Platform Committee in 2016. We did pass the most progressive platform in history. We banned fracking on that Platform Committee, but it didn't stop Hillary Clinton from going to have a fundraiser at a fracking CEO's house a couple of days later. So, it's not just about the committees, it's about keeping that pressure on the presidential nominee well past the convention. But I think at the end of the day, having a floor fight is not it's really not how we want to go and defeat Donald Trump. We want to have a party that's strong and unified, I guess.
Well, one of the things that I thought was revealing in that clip between Maddow and Sanders was Sanders reiterating a line that he used to use in 2016. After like April, when it appeared that he couldn't overtake Hillary Clinton anymore, he started to say, well, everybody should have the right to vote. We should go through this process. And he would talk about California in June. He wanted to give everybody who had supported him early on the chance to actually do that American thing of going to the ballot box and casting their ballot. To hear him saying that again suggests that even if he becomes, delegately challenged against Joe Biden, that he's going to continue in the race so that all 50 states get a chance to vote. Was that your reading of that? And do you think that he'll come under more pressure this time around to say, look, there's no reason to take this out to June this time?
Yeah, I think, the primaries, the structure and the schedule is different this time around as well. So there's more, there are these clumps of primaries together, which is actually something that we on the Unity Reform Commission, even though in some ways it did benefit Bernie Sanders this time around because he's the most well-funded candidate who's been campaigning for years, it doesn't necessarily fund candidates that don't have a lot of funds early on. So it usually benefits the candidate with more money when you have to compete in multiple states at once because, you have to be able to have operations in multiple states. You have to be able to buy ads in multiple states. It didn't necessarily work for Michael Bloomberg, but, generally speaking, it favors a candidate who's well-funded and has stronger name ID. With that being said, I think the pressure is going to be pretty strong for either candidate going into the convention if they are in the minority and they do not hold the majority of the delegates, especially if superdelegates start to speak up because they see that their influence might be more weighed. And, we have to remember that superdelegates do have the ability to vote on the second ballot. So, they could start to make that argument that even if Bernie Sanders is capable of winning the plurality, for instance, they can still weigh in. And then they have weighed in. A lot of these superdelegates, we're forgetting, are congressmen and women who have endorsed candidates on Bernie's side as well. So, you're going to see a similar conversation to 2016. I don't think it's going to be as there's not going to be as much vitriol. Part of the reason is because the rules have changed a bit. But I think Senator Sanders, if he does not have the majority of delegates, is going to be feeling the pressure of defeating Trump, because this is different than 2016. We did expect to do well in California, and they called California based on the superdelegate count before California. And the media was reporting that Hillary had this enormous lead when actually in earned delegates, pledged delegates, she only had a couple hundred pledged delegate leads, which is why California mattered. So there was an actual contested convention. It just became about the superdelegates.
Right.
And we thought that Hillary could beat Donald Trump, frankly. I think people are very concerned
I think
about
that's a key
Biden's
point.
ability to do so.
Yeah.
That's key, because in 2016, it's all fun and games to play out the primary because everybody assumes, there's this carnival barker who anybody is going to steamroll. Whereas this time, all Democrats care about is beating this formidable foe of a carnival barker.
I also want to ask you, Nomiki, about this rule. We've talked about this on the show already, but the DNC be interfering in the debate and the format in order to try and get Joe Biden the ability to sit down. With the Sanders campaign saying, no, we want to stand up and actually face questions from journalists. The DNC the Biden campaign says the DNC is the one that's pushing these rules. What do you make of that? Or maybe you have your own insight into what's going on here.
I'm old enough to remember when candidates used to negotiate these things at the debates.
Right.
And that has not happened at all this election. The DNC, we say, the DNC, this monolith, they're making these decisions. And in some ways, it's crazy because the membership of the DNC is very diverse and split. You have a progressive side. Keith Ellison almost got elected as the chair. And you have a more establishment side that is weighted with people who've just been put on the DNC without any sort of electoral process. With that being said, this was a Tom Perez decision. There's no committee this went through. There was no debate, conversation about the debate rules ever. It was just a unilateral decision from the chair's office, Tom Perez's office, about the DNC rules. So, am I to believe that Joe Biden didn't get into Tom Perez's ear? No. I'm sorry. He wasn't. He was part of the Obama administration. And, if you want to look like you're a democracy, then at least pretend you're a democracy.
Right.
They're not even doing that.
Yeah, it's a funny point.
So when it comes to exerting the kind of influence on the platform and on the future rules of the party that you talked about earlier, how important is it for Sanders to run all the way through the process, or will he have enough delegates? Let's say he goes all the way through March. He competes this next super-ish Tuesday, the super-ish Tuesday that comes after it. That's about 2/3 or so of all the delegates will have been divvied out at that point. Is that enough for him to exert the kind of influence he would need to kind of push the platform and the rules in a progressive direction, or ought he stay in longer to amass more, or is it just a kind of a marginal value at that point?
It's a good question. I have to actually look at the number of delegates that remain after the second or the third Super Tuesday, or the second round of super elections, I guess. There are already appointees to these committees that are, I believe, around 45 to 60, depending on the committee, and they were appointed by Tom Perez's slate. On those committees, this was reported on a few weeks ago, there's maybe like one Bernie person on them. So he's going to be going in already, whether he's the nominee or not, as the minority. If he's the nominee, he has more delegates who are going to be there fighting for him. Even if Joe Biden were to surrender all of his delegates to Bernie Sanders, for instance, he'd still have this 45 to 60 person appointed slate that Tom Perez put on there. And what's curious about that is when you look at those names, there are very few, if any, elected DNC members on that. Those are just people that have been appointed by Tom Perez that are DNC members. So, this is the kind of these are the shenanigans that go on behind the scenes in the process that really try to prevent any sort of reforms from happening, even when Democrats, when Bernie Sanders, for instance, wins through a democratic process. And so we're going to be going into the convention, the platform committee, no matter what, probably in the minority, having a very similar fight to 2016. The Rules Committee is going to be different because it's not the Rules Committee for the party per se. You can deal with a little bit of that business. It's the Rules Committee for the convention. So, if Bernie says he doesn't want a contested convention, or, if they want more credentials, I mean, it's chaos. And the other side of this is there's a very real conversation about not having a convention at all because of the coronavirus. And I think that would be something that Tom Perez is probably praying for.
Well, we're going to be on top of it. Nomiki, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And also, everybody go and subscribe to her show on YouTube. Yeah. It's excellent. All right, we'll see you later.
Thank you so much.
Next on Rising, journalist Aaron Mate. He elaborates on the Burisma scandal, which will become fodder for the Trump campaign. That's when Rising returns.